Cuban government denounced effects of the United States blockade on the quality of life of Cubans. In Ecuador, agricultural laborers have blocked roads in different parts of the country as part of the national strike actions to denounce the failure of the government to abide by agreements made with the sectors. Spain's new cohort of ministers have taken oaths before King Felipe this Monday in Madrid. Hello, welcome to From the South. I am Janet Perez Moya from the teleSUR studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. Stay with us. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel and some of the country's top officials held Monday a press conference to discuss the routes and response to the ongoing destabilization campaign against Cuba. Díaz-Canel cabinet ministers and high Communist Party officials took questions from journalists addressing the main issues raised by the unprecedented demonstrations staged Sunday in several Cuban cities organized through social networks. Main issues were blockades, shortage of food and medicines, and monetary regulations affecting the US dollar. Dissatisfaction is legitimate, Díaz-Canel said, as the country is facing the most brutal United States blockade in 60 years, intensified in times of pandemic, affecting all ways of life in the island. Yet officials stress beyond legitimate vows, the Cuban people are the target of a sophisticated communication operation in the frame of non-conventional psychological warfare to trigger regime change.
I think that during 1 year and a half, we have not had blackouts, except those for problems in the distribution systems, in the different structures, and it is now where we have a generation deficit, especially because of some problems of the energy plants. I think some people told me it is a miracle that we've not had blackouts in these conditions. And I told them it is not a miracle. A miracle is a divine will. No, it is about the effort. It is about the intelligence that we have been working and with the political will to defend the generation of electricity to the population. But also all these processes that we have faced and to defeat in the face of a policy of economic asphyxiation to cause social outbreaks in the country. All these have been accumulating, and the problems we have today have to do with that. So in this situation of the supply systems, what kind of problems we have faced? We have not always had all the necessary fuels.
Expanding and prioritizing electricity for the Cuban public health network further strain the grid, said Díaz-Canel, who is an electrical engineer.
The blackouts have another peculiarity regarding the reality we are living with the COVID, as the COVID cases have increased, as part of the concepts. That we will probably talk about that as part of the concept to attend, to take care of the Cuban population. So, apart of the hospitals, we had to open isolation centers in other institutions, in other installations, in other facilities, let's say schools, and other centers that could have these kind of conditions. We have even used hotels as hospitals. So also with the concept of causing the less problems in the attention to these problems of COVID, we have protected more circuits.
In an exclusive interview for teleSUR, Daniel Kovalik, human rights professor at Pittsburgh University, stressed that we can see a parallel scenario between the situation now in Cuba and the scheme used to try to pass supposed humanitarian aid to Venezuela in 2019.
regime change tactics that the U.S., as you say, has used in Venezuela, is still using in Venezuela, is using in Nicaragua, is using in Cuba. The U.S. denies these countries access to very important goods, medicines, food, etc., and then it offers some, minimal amount of humanitarian aid, so-called, in order to try to coax the people of these countries into overthrowing their governments. This is classic. In the case of Venezuela, there was an internal U.S. government review, which in fact concluded that the humanitarian aid offered to Venezuela in 2018 was purely politically motivated for the purpose of regime change. And again, I think we're seeing similar things happening now in Cuba.
Professor Kobolik emphasized this is part of a non-conventional warfare, a new strategy against Cuba.
Is extreme sanctions against Cuba, which are causing deprivation and suffering amongst the Cuban people. And now the U.S. is trying to blame Cuba for those problems. And it's trying to provoke an insurrection in that country. And we're seeing some of that come to fruition at present.
Our correspondent Alejandro Kirk has been sensing the streets of Old Havana. This is his report.
This is Havana Vieja, the old part of Havana, where probably the heart of this capital city lies. This is where tourists come to have this Havana feeling. But now it's not time for tourism. Now it's time for crisis. There is a crisis in the country derived from sanctions, derived from the pandemic, and also from an economic crisis that, the industry is paralyzed. This is where probably yesterday on Sunday, when demonstrations were staged around the country, organized via social media, in the internet, we're expecting to have an uprising in this place, because this is where probably most of the shortages and problems of the Cuban situation at the moment, the crisis, become more apparent in terms of shortages, housing, queues to get food, and all that the international mainstream media are always underlining. But it didn't happen. What happened here was that some people came over for a demonstration, and another crowd came after the call from the president, Miguel Díaz-Canel, to come out to the streets, because the streets, as from the times of Fidel Castro, said belong to the revolutionaries and not to the counter-revolutionaries. President Díaz-Canel today explained some of the causes of this insatisfaction. He said that it was legitimate for people to demonstrate, it was legitimate for people to be unhappy about many things that are happening in the country, but it was not right to do it the way they did. And that's why the people came out to defend their revolution. And that's what they did, without violence, but with strong determination. There was no police repression, and as you see, these streets are empty in terms of demonstrations, but busy in terms of people organizing their lives in times of crisis. This is the heart of the Havana, as I said, and calm is reigning here right now, and we hope that it's going to be like that for the time to come.
Thank you, Kirk. And Mexican President Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador said on Monday he was in favor of a solution through talks and without the use of force to resolve the Cuban internal problems, and offered to send help.
To help Cuba, the first thing that should be done is to suspend the embargo on Cuba. As most countries of the world are requesting. That would truly be a humanitarian gesture. No country in the world should be besieged, blockaded. That is the most contrary thing to human rights. And it has to be the Cuban people who decide, because Cuba is a free, independent, and sovereign country. There should be no interventionism.
In Haiti, interim Prime Minister Claude Joseph asked the country's political actors to unite in order to advance with the assassination investigations.
It is not something that can go unpunished. Now I thought that all the political actors must get together to plan, to move forward, because us in the government, our main concern is justice. No one can stop what we are doing.
We will take a short break now. Don't go away. Welcome back. In Ecuador, agricultural laborers have blocked roads in different parts of the country as part of the national strike actions to denounce the failure of the government to abide by agreements made with the sector. President Guillermo Lasso has threatened strikers with jail. The strike was announced by the national movement, which represents farmers, agricultural and rural workers. They are demanding the fulfillment the agreements signed during the electoral campaign of President Guillermo Lasso. According to the agreements, minimum price should be established for agricultural products and regulations established regarding material costs for their production. The National Federation of Rice Growers and the National Federation of Banana Producers of Ecuador could also join the national strike action. At least 12 people have been killed and 20 others injured when a bus carrying migrants overturned and caught fires in eastern Turkey. The bus is reported to have tumbled into a ditch while traveling overnight near Jumakli in Van province, which borders Iran. The migrants who travel through this route usually come from Iran, Afghanistan and Pakistan, crossing into Turkey on foot before boarding buses to cities such as Istanbul and Ankara. Hospitals in Myanmar are faced with a serious shortage of oxygen as the country struggles to cope with increasing cases of COVID-19 virus. Relatives of COVID-19 victims are seen trying to ensure oxygen needed by patients. The surge in COVID-19 cases has been worsened by ongoing protests against the recent military takeover, which were also joined by health practitioners. The country's health ministry on Saturday reported a record of 4,300 new confirmed cases and 71 deaths. Afghan authorities have pledged to take charge of the Taliban siege, assuring that its army has in the past days made some progress in defeating Taliban fighters. The Afghan military made an announcement that it has installed an anti-missile system at Kabul's airport to counter incoming rockets, and they claim to have killed dozens of Taliban fighters in recent days. Taliban militants increased their offensive across the country since early May, when the final U.S. troops began leaving Afghanistan.
Our foreign friends have given us the system. It has a very complicated technology. For now, our foreign friends are operating it while we are trying to build the capacity to use it. This is the information that we collected since last Wednesday. Our security and defense forces have recently carried out of a total of 124 airstrikes in 25 provinces, resulting in 1,177 Taliban insurgents being killed and 651 wounded.
Countries have started evacuating their diplomats from war-torn Afghanistan as Taliban fighters continue gaining more ground. Despite information by government officials that they are in control of the situation, some countries, including India and China, have already started pulling out and closing their consulates. China has issued a statement blaming the United States for the ongoing security crisis in Afghanistan and accused the U.S. of dumping the war it started of the Afghan people. Meanwhile, the Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani has called on Taliban fighters to stop the siege.
Let's ask a couple of questions to the Taliban. First, who are you fighting for? Are you fighting for Afghanistan, or you want Afghanistan to be under control of others? If you love Afghanistan, promise me that you have not accepted the Durand line. Promise me that you will not change Afghanistan from a crossroads to one-way road. Promise me that you will not sell Afghanistan's water to others. Promise me that you will not save other people.
More stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back. Spain's new cohort of ministers have taken their oaths before King Felipe this Monday in the Palacio de la Zarzuela in Madrid. They will hold their first meeting in La Moncloa. Some 63% of the cabinet is now controlled by women, making Spain's Council of Ministers the most representative in Europe. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has carried out a sweeping cabinet reshuffle, replacing some of his most important ministers. Sánchez unveiled the change on Saturday, saying that the new government will focus on Spain's economic recovery and holding up his new team as a global example of gender equality. Curfew in 32 Valencia municipalities after court approval due to the increase of COVID-19 infection rates. The Valencian community is facing an exponential increase of the contagion rate and an increase of hospitalizations in Spain, and the Supreme Court of Justice has ruled to stop the spread of the virus. It has issued a resolution that will allow the reduction of nighttime mobility in 32 towns with more than 5,000 inhabitants. Meanwhile, healthcare workers in Greece will be suspended if they refuse to get vaccinated under a new mandatory policy announced by the country's Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis.
The immediate vaccination of workers who care for the elderly in nursing homes, which is the most vulnerable category, becomes mandatory. Those who do not vaccinate will be suspended from work beginning on August 16, because it is not possible for people who are supposed to protect those who are most at risk to be the same potential carriers of that risk. From September the 1st, mandatory vaccination will also apply to both public and private healthcare professionals. It is unthinkable, for example, for an unvaccinated nurse to care for an immunosuppressed cancer patient.
All remaining lockdown restrictions in England will be lifted in a week despite the sharp rise in coronavirus cases, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson confirmed.
Every week that goes by, we're getting hundreds of thousands more jabs into arms, and our delay to the roadmap that we announced last month has enabled us to get 7 million more jabs in the last 4 weeks alone. By next Monday, 2/3 of adults will have received a second dose, and every adult will have been offered a first dose. And it is the single most crucial thing now that you get that jab. A jab that can protect you and your family and allow you, for instance, to go on holiday. And it is, of course, only thanks to the vaccine program that we are able to take these cautious steps now. But to take these steps, we must be cautious and we must be vaccinated. So please, we'll keep our tough border policy, including quarantine for those arriving from red list countries. And we will keep the test, trace and isolate system in place.
Still, concerns over the rapid increase in cases has put pressures on the government to take a more cautious approach over lifting restrictions. New infections could reach 100,000 a day later in the summer. Many of the infections have occurred among younger people who have yet to receive the first doses of the vaccine. The government has no plans yet to offer vaccines to children under 18. The British government, which enforced one of the longest lockdowns in the world, has lifted restrictions for England in a series of steps that began with reopening schools in March. The European Union has extended its coercive economic sanctions against Russia. The bloc is using Moscow's alleged non-compliance with the Minsk agreement on Ukraine as its latest justification for the measures. The extension is for 6 months. The move comes as NATO forces up their pressure campaign against Moscow. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov noted that this decision was not unexpected for his government and ignores the willingness to improve relations between Russia and the European Union. We have come to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You also can find us in social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Janet Perez Moya. Thank you for watching.